Okay, welcome to this week's screencast for anatomy. This week we're going to be looking at the mechanics of respiration. Now, the mechanics of respiration essentially is describing how we use our muscles to breathe. So we've already looked at the structure of the respiratory system. Now we're going to look at how the muscles of the body enable us to breathe. So the first thing to consider is the first major type of muscle that helps us breathe. And these muscles are called the intercostal muscles. Now, the intercostal muscles are located around the ribs. So as you can see here, in terms of origin and insertion, they're connected between each rib. And so this almost acts as like a web of muscle around the rib cage. Now, these muscles are located on the outside and the inside of the ribs. So what we can see here are the external intercostal muscles, because these muscles are layered on the outside of the ribs. So they're just attached between the ribs, okay, and these will help us breathe. So if we imagine, for example, just at the bottom of the screen here, I've drawn our two ribs. Our intercostal muscle essentially is just layered over the top as so. Our internal intercostal muscles are layered exactly the same way, but they're just layered on the inside of the rib cage. So again, very similar, but essentially we've got one set of muscles on the outside of the ribs and one set of muscles on the inside of the ribs. Again, if we were to look at a cross section of a rib, okay, we might see a rib such as so and as so, and then what we would have on one side would be the external intercostal muscle, and on one side would be the internal intercostal muscle. And all this means is when the muscles both contract together, okay, the ribs are brought closer together. Okay, the other major muscle that we need to breathe is called our diaphragm, and this is located just here at the bottom of the thoracic cavity. Now, the diaphragm is extremely important in the breathing process. Now, what you're seeing here is the diaphragm in its domed position, which is what it does when it is in the relaxed state. And this is important because this relates to the two breathing processes that we have. So this is a slightly better anatomical diagram of what the diaphragm looks like. So as you can see, it does look like a parachute. It's a big dome shape. And this is what it looks like when it's relaxed. Okay, so now we're going to discuss the two phases of breathing. So we have inspiration, which is breathing air in, and expiration, which is breathing air out. So in inspiration or inhalation, we're breathing air into the body. Now, we might think that we just suck the air in through our mouth, but it doesn't really work like that. It's the actions of the muscles that help us breathe the air in. So the first thing we've got is the intercostal muscles. So as you can see here, the intercostal muscles contract, and by doing that they squeeze together the rib cage, so each rib gets closer together. And what that actually means is that the whole rib cage moves upwards, as you can see by these little red arrows here. So the whole rib cage moves upwards, okay, and by doing that it increases the amount of space that we have inside the chest or the thoracic cavity, meaning the lungs are then able to expand with the air coming in. We also have the diaphragm. Now, the diaphragm again also contracts, so all of our respiratory muscles are contracting in order for us to breathe in. And when the diaphragm contracts, it actually flattens out. So rather than being the dome shape that you can see at the moment here, it actually starts to flatten and move downwards. And so actually we start to see it move down this way, and it flattens more, as you would see, like with what I've just drawn there with my pen. So by doing this, we increase the amount of space inside the cavity. And by increasing this space, what we do is we lower the pressure inside the chest. And by lowering the pressure, this means that air is going to move from the outside space, so the air inside, and it's going to move into the area of low pressure, which means moving into the lungs. So in summary, both sets of our muscles contract, and by doing that, that enables the chest cavity to get bigger, which lowers the pressure, which then means air is forced into the lungs. So in this short summary here, you can see here the intercostals contract, which means the rib cage is raised. The diaphragm contracts, which means it flattens out. Therefore, pressure is lowered in the thoracic cavity, which means the lungs will inflate. Okay, let's look at the opposite then. So let's look at exhalation. So with exhalation, we almost have exactly the same, but in complete reverse. So in order to get air out, all of these muscles that have just contracted now need to relax. So our intercostal muscles, which are located in between each of the ribs, these guys are going to relax. And by relaxing, that means that the rib cage and the ribs move further apart. And what this means is that the rib cage itself actually lowers. Okay, so again, when you breathe out, if you feel on your chest when you breathe out, everything moves downwards and lowers. Now the diaphragm, the other muscle, this also relaxes, and when it relaxes, it moves upwards and moves back into this dome shape. And what this ultimately means is that the pressure inside the thoracic cavity now increases. Okay, so what we're doing, if we imagine, is we're now squashing all of the air particles into a smaller space. And by doing this, it means that the air is going to be forced out of the lungs. So again, the key part of this phase is that the muscles relax. So a huge part of understanding the diaphragm is seeing this movement. So in this 3D animation, you can see here when the diaphragm contracts, it flattens out and moves downwards, and when it relaxes, it moves upwards. And again, look at the movement of the rib cage here. Okay, as we breathe out and as we breathe in. So you can see that the diaphragm has a huge role in the mechanics of breathing. Okay, so in summary then, the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm are the key muscles in respiration. When we have inspiration, our muscles contract, and when we want to breathe out or expiration, these muscles relax. So they work together in the same way.